Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought Assessment webinar for the month of January. I hope everyone has had a great start to the new year. This is our first webinar using the new GoToMeeting platform. Any feedback on how everything goes from registering, logging in, and the experience of the webinar will be useful information to us. I'll provide my contact info for you at the end of our webinar. And for any of you that may be new to this webinar, we typically have time for any comments, questions, or discussion at the end of our webinar speakers. And also for questions, if you don't want to speak aloud, please use the question box on the GoToMeeting tool panel, or you can raise your hand by pushing the hand icon on the GoToMeeting tool panel as well. And a reminder to our speakers, as usual, just remember to unmute yourself prior to speaking and give me a cue when you're ready for your next slide. Our speakers today will be David Zierden of the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University, Paul Ankhorn of USGS, Jeffrey Dober of the Southeast River Forecast Center, and Troy Ephraim and Cynthia Donald of the Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District. And now I'll turn it over to our first speaker, David Zierden. The floor is yours.
Okay, can you still hear me, Rachel?
I can.
Okay, great. Thanks again, and also thanks to all of you for agreeing to move the webinar to later in the month. So now the CPC seasonal outlooks and ENSO discussion and such like that will be much fresher, as that usually comes out the third Thursday of each month. So our timing was off the previous few years, where it's a little better in sync with the Climate Prediction Center right now. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll start with kind of a year-end review, but we're going to talk on this slide more about temperature than about drought or precipitation. And there's been quite the temperature across Florida and the Southeast in recent years. 2019, Georgia and North Carolina recorded their warmest year ever. South Carolina and Florida were second warmest. Alabama was third warmest. So that just continues a trend over the past at least 5 years or maybe a decade. Here in Florida, 54 out of the last 57 months have all been warmer than average, and that includes the last 20 months in a row. And also, 6 out of the 12 months have set record values over the last 5 years. And interestingly, it's the overnight low temperatures that are affected more than the afternoon maximum temperatures. So that's a strong trend we've seen in recent years. And the bottom graph is a 60-month running average of statewide temperature here in the state of Florida. And what we see is over the past couple years, that 5-year average is spiking off the charts, nearly 2 full degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the 1990 through 2010 base period, which was warmer than the long-term average. So it certainly appears we're in a new climate regime here in Florida and the Southeast United States. We'll go to the next slide, and we'll focus back on drought now. This is the current U.S. drought monitor, and it shows that most of the tri-state area and the ACF basin is drought-free.
Logged in.
Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Rachel?
You're good, David.
Okay. Yeah, no, but this just, the current drought monitor shows that most of the ACF is drought-free, with the exception of the coastal areas of the lower ACF, where there's a little bit of moderate drought or D1 creeping in. And on the next slide, not to steal Paul's thunder too much by showing Streamflows, But these are the daily stream flows from across North Florida, and it shows that here in that one small area of Leon and Wakulla County where we do have the moderate drought, it's not just a lack of rainfall. The St. Mark's River and the Sopchoppy River are at only 3% of normal. Telegia Creek that flows into the Apalachicola is only at 8% of normal. Interestingly enough, the Apalachicola River itself is above medium flow right now at around 60%. So it's a very localized drought, but still there are some impacts being felt. We'll go ahead to the next slide and start taking a look at recent rainfall. And these are the radar estimates of rainfall over the last 7 days, and kind of shows a consistent story of plentiful rainfall from a half an inch to over an inch across most of the middle and upper ACF basin at the Atlanta area and headwaters, but lesser amounts of only a fraction of an inch in the lower ACF and in the Florida Panhandle. And if we go to the next slide, we'll take a look back a little further over the last 30 days, and this, again, estimated rainfall totals. And you see heavier amounts across North Georgia and most of Alabama, amounts ranging from 5 to 8 inches, well above normal. But then you see sharp gradient as we get down into the lower ACF and the Florida Panhandle, where monthly totals are now only in the 1 to 2 inch range. So that's kind of been a consistent story, and the track of the storm tracks and recent rainfall over the last 30 even to 90 days. If we go to the next slide, we'll take a look at 90-day rainfall. Now this is departures from normal, and you see much above normal across most of the middle and upper ACF basin, as shaded in the greens and blues. Yet here in the Leon County, Wakulla County area, and portions of the lower ACF, we see deficits of 4 to 6, even approaching 8 inches over the last 3 months. So quite a gradient between further north and upstream and the coastal areas of the ACF basin. So we'll go ahead to the next slide and start taking a look ahead. This is the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast from the National Weather Service, and it shows the result of continued unsettled weather across the northern Gulf Coast. We have an active subtropical jet stream right now with a couple more shortwave disturbances forecast to ride along it. But that should hopefully bring a little bit more rainfall to the lower ACF and a good portion of Georgia and Alabama, as showed in this forecast. Weekly amounts of 1 to 2 inches are in the forecast from this series of systems. On the next slide, we'll take a look further out and look at the Pacific Ocean. And on the top graph is a map of sea surface temperature departures from normal currently across the equatorial Pacific. And we see really a mixed bag, some areas of cooler water, other larger areas of warmer water, but it's not a coherent big signal of either El Nino or La Nina. So we are still firmly entrenched in the neutral phase of the Pacific Ocean. And on the bottom is our familiar Nino 3.4 index that's been waffling around that half-degree threshold over the past several months, but hasn't stayed consistently above that threshold. So by all counts, you'd need at least 5 consecutive months above that half-degree threshold for it to be an El Nino event, and this one certainly is not going to qualify. So all indicators are we're still firmly in the neutral phase. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look at the forecast, and the official forecast is on the left, represented by the bar graphs. Because we've been hovering around that half-degree threshold for El Nino, actually the likelihood of El Nino in the first forecast cycle, December, January, and February, has been increased to nearly 50%. But again, I think that's an over forecast, and that we're going to be a long way from actually reaching that El Nino criteria. And as we see, neutral is still the preferred phase as we go through the spring and into the summer, even into late summer, neutral is still the most likely. And over on the right is the model spread from all the different Nino forecast models. And it shows why there's so much uncertainty. There's now a big spread between some of the models showing continued slightly above normal temperatures. Others show the Pacific Ocean actually cooling. So a lot of spread, and we're approaching that spring prediction barrier where it's very difficult to forecast for the next summer or for any transition in the Pacific Ocean. So now, as usual, is a time of a lot of uncertainty and nothing really to hang our hats on. And on the next slide, to add to the confusion, this has gotten a little bit of run over the past week, is NOAA's CFS model is pretty bullish on predicting a transition to the La Nina phase during this coming summer. But again, we're on the wrong side of the spring prediction barrier, and this is only one model. So take it with a grain of salt. There's still a lot of uncertainty in predicting the sea surface temperatures at this time. So with all that in mind, we'll go to the next slide and we'll look at the seasonal outlook, the February through April 3-month period. Over on the left is the temperature outlook, which shows a continued increased chance of above normal temperatures for much of the southern United States, including the tri-state area. Over on the right is the precipitation forecast, which is kind of foreshadowing a storm track up the Mississippi Valley where they have increased chances of above normal rainfall. But further here than most of the ACF, we're at just the equal chances, which means no predisposition for either above or below normal rainfall. And putting that together with the current drought monitor, this is the seasonal drought outlook, which shows that little spot along the Florida Panhandle is likely to be removed as we continue through the winter rainy season. Nothing much else to say about much of the eastern United States. So we'll go to the last slide and summarize. Georgia and North Carolina registered their warmest year on record in 2019. Florida and South Carolina were second warmest, Alabama third warmest. Currently, the ACF Basin is relatively drought-free, with the exception of the small localized area of drought along the coast of the Florida Panhandle. Weekly to 30-day rainfall has been above normal over the upper and middle ACF, below normal over the Florida Panhandle. The forecast calls for unsettled weather for the rest of this week with an active subtropical jet. But even with that, the rainfall amounts forecasted are fairly modest. Neutral conditions continue to reign in the Pacific Ocean, and the best forecast is for those to continue into the summer months. After that, really a lot of uncertainty in spite of the NOAA's model hinting at a transition to La Nina. The CPC seasonal forecast favors higher chances for above normal temperatures, but equal chances for rainfall. And again, the only drought remaining in the ACF Basin is the small spot in the coastal areas, and there's a fairly favorable forecast for the next few months.
Thank you, David. Now I'd like to turn it over to Paul Ankhorn with our Streamflows and groundwater conditions.
Good afternoon, Rachel.
All right, good afternoon. I can hear you good, Paul.
Okay. All right, so let's take a look at our first slide here. To the right are current conditions. These are real-time streamflow conditions as of this morning. And you can see we have a lot of green showing across the 3 states, which indicates normal flow. If you look a little deeper, you'll find these are slightly higher of normal, but you know, for the most part, they're showing up just as green, which means normal. Across the whole ACF Basin, there are couple of stations that are showing it above normal, and then a couple of stations that are below normal. And then again, that area that David highlighted just to the east of Apalachicola, where conditions are much below or at below normal conditions for this time of year. So that's something to keep an eye on. Next slide. We will begin look here at this is the below normal 7-day average stream flow. So this is an indication of hydrologic drought. And as you can see, the bottom map is most current, and I pulled that this morning in the ACF Basin. It's not showing any points of or basins that are ranked as below normal 7-day average. There is that red area again, which we're all familiar with now, just on the coastal region of the Florida Panhandle there. Okay, next slide. We'll start looking at 28-day average flows. So this is a trend line here, and it's designed to show more of a long-term average. So these are the daily average for the previous 28 days, and they are ranked accordingly with the historic record for that station. So these two plots here are both Lake Lanier inflows, Chattahoochee River Cornelia, which is trending up towards above normal, but currently in the higher ranges of normal flow. And then the Chestatee River near Dahlonega has just crossed over into above normal. So those stations are both seeing the recharge period and reacting accordingly with increased flow. The next slide, we'll look at conditions below Lake Lanier. So we have Chattahoochee River at Atlanta and at Whitesburg, and both stations are still showing the typical recharge and increase in 28-day average flow, and they're both currently ranked at above normal. We'll move further downstream on the next slide. So this is Chattahoochee River at West Point in Columbus. West Point has just crossed over into much above normal, continuing to trend higher. And Columbus there is right at the 90th percentile, which has flattened out somewhat. But you can see we expect conditions, hopefully, with the rainfall that's forecast, that we'll continue to see an uptick as the historical data shows. Next slide, we'll cross over into the Flint River Basin. So a big change from September there. We were seeing at Carsonville new historic 28-day average lows there. So we have swung the pendulum to the other side here, and we are well up into the much above normal for flow conditions at both stations there. So next slide, further downstream, we'll look at Albany and Bainbridge. So Albany is currently ranked above normal, as well as Bainbridge. And they are basically flattened out there. Bainbridge is right at around the 85th percentile. All right, next slide, we shall look at the most downstream station, which is what we report, Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee. And that 28-day average flow is currently ranking above normal. All right, next slide, we'll look at the groundwater conditions. So the graphic on the right is most recent, and you can see that there's been this increase in well elevation across the ACF Basin. Majority of stations currently ranking as normal conditions, but there are a couple of note. One up in that's the Unicoi State Park, which is the most northern, at least in the ACF Basin. It's currently orange, which means below normal, and then down just south of Columbus, a station is coming in or ranking at much below normal. Other stations closer to Albany are showing normal conditions, with 2 or 3, 4 stations there showing above normal. 2 stations that are circled are our index stations, if you will. So we'll look at the first one on the next slide. And that's Miller County. So since the last webinar, we've seen about a 5-8 foot increase in elevation there. So currently conditions are ranked at the normal, where we would expect to see them for this time of year. Next slide is our other station, which is Doherty County. So since the last webinar too, we've seen a pretty significant increase there to the point where it was ranked as above normal for, I guess, the beginning of January there, and now we're looking, we've just crossed back into normal conditions, the higher end of normal. All right, so the next slide, I'll just wrap up what I presented. The stream flow for the ACF Basin, currently in the above normal to much below normal, with note that the majority of the stations currently ranked in the normal range. No portions of the ACF Basin are currently ranked as below normal for the 7-day average stream flow. 28-day average stream flow for the Chattahoochee River currently ranks from normal to above normal. And for the Flint River, we're seeing conditions from above normal to normal. And then for groundwater conditions, range from much above normal to much below normal, but a majority of the stations are ranked as normal. So good news. All right, Rachel, that concludes it. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. And now I'd like to switch gears and talk about our stream flow forecast, courtesy of Jeff Dober. Do we have you ready, Jeff?
I do. I am.
All right, sounds good.
So here's our stream flow forecast, our 1-month mean daily stream flow forecast for the watershed. And this takes us through pretty much the month of February, and these forecasts are pretty much based on all the information that David and Paul have been speaking about. The stream flow trends have been near normal to above normal, and then David gave you an idea of the rainfall patterns. And right now, is really we're going to be on that cusp between near normal and above normal across most of the watershed. The Chattahoochee, the Flint, and the Apalachicola right now looks like for all, even though we've got above normal across the north part of the watershed and and as well as the Flint, and then the lower there near normal, I could really see this being near to above normal across all the gauge areas in the watershed, given the rainfall patterns that potentially could have in the next couple of weeks. With that being said, the other thing I wanted to point out is Lake Lanier's at 1071. That's their winter pool. So they're at their level pool there. So let's go ahead and do the 3-month. And I'll show you, here's, we're pretty much calling for, this is the forecast period here is February 1st through May. So this takes us through a good part of the spring season. And as you can see, we're calling for near normal stream flows across most of the watershed. Our ensemble stream flow prediction tool is also hinting at near normal or more or less equal chances at near, above, or below normal. So we'll call it near normal. And as David pointed out, it seemed like the lower ACF may be favored in the short term, but as we go into the spring, the upper ACF, as far as rainfall, may be favored. And so that's why up there in the upper watershed, you do see some indication of that, the 10th percentile chance of having stream flows below normal. So we've recovered quite significantly. I don't know how many of you folks have looked at, but we've recovered across the southeast significantly since October. And we think that trend will probably continue into the latter half of the winter months and into early spring. And that's all I had for as far as the stream flow forecast. So again, in summary, for the 1 and 3 month, we're going to stick with the current trends near to above normal.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff. And now I'd like to turn it over to our last speakers, Troy Ephraim and Cynthia Donald of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District. They will be speaking to us about our reservoir conditions. Do we have either of you two on the line, Troy or Cynthia?
Yes. Can you hear me, Rachel?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. We're having a little issue logging in, but I'm just gonna kind of step through the slides. I got the PowerPoint pulled up on my computer.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So we can start with Lake Lanier, and the midnight pool elevation was 1071.04, and we're expecting our 10-day forecast to be right at about 1071.2, and we're a little above sky curve right now, and we're expecting to stay there for about the next 5 weeks. Next slide is West Point, and the midnight pool elevation at West Point was 629.75, and the 10-day forecast there is 629.32, and it's also above sky curve right now. We're expecting to stay there over the next 5 weeks with our summer refill starting at about mid-February. Next slide. We got Walter F. George, and the midnight pool elevation is 189.17, and our 10-day forecast there is right at 189.01, and it's also above sky curve right now. We're also projected to stay close to that 189 over the next 5 weeks. Next slide. It's Jim Woodruff and Lake Seminole. The midnight pool elevation was 77.15, and our 10-day forecast is 77.1, and we're expected to stay around 77 over the next 5 weeks as well. Next slide. This is our ACF Basin composite conservation and flood storage. We've been a little above top of conservation since the beginning of the year, and we're expected to stay in zone 1 over the next 5 weeks as well. Next slide. So in conclusion, our inflows are pretty close to normal right now. Lanier, George, and West Point are all above sky curve, and we expect them to stay then over that, about that much over the next 5 weeks, and we'll continue to meet the downstream flow requirements. And overall, the ACF system conservation is in zone 1, and we expect it to stay there over the next few weeks.
All right, thank you very much, Troy. And now Meredith Muth, our regional coordinator from NIDIS, has a few things to bring up that are upcoming for everyone to mark on their calendars.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel, and to all the speakers, as usual, incredibly helpful information here. There are 3 upcoming opportunities we just wanted to briefly bring to your attention. The first one is that NIDIS, with a number of partners, including NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, Albany State University, and Auburn, will be developing what's called a drought dashboard. So this will be an online interface located on the U.S. Drought portal that will provide real-time drought information at very local levels. So we're in the process of soliciting input from throughout the ACF basin on what would be most useful, how drought information is accessed and used. And so these are a series of 3 listening sessions. The upcoming one is on March 4th in East Point, Florida, coastal Apalachicola. So you're welcome to attend. There's some information contact on that slide, or you can reach out directly to me. And I would make a note that this drought dashboard will, even though it's going to be initially focused on the ACF River Basin, it will also include information relevant to the full states of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. Next. Coming up next week in Columbia, South Carolina, a little bit out of the ACF basin, but still relevant, is a U.S. Drought Monitor workshop that will have a strong emphasis on agricultural information and impacts as well. So again, this will be in Columbia, and there's a website there that you can link to. Next. And then finally, without going into too many details, NIDIS, which is a partnership between federal, state, tribal, and local communities. We've been in the ACF River Basin for nearly 10 years now, and there are discussions going on to build on the successes in the ACF and expand the DEWS, this drought early warning system approach, to the full Southeast. So to cover the full states of Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Carolinas, and possibly Virginia. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that we would be looking for input from stakeholders, including yourselves and partners throughout the region. And there will be some virtual discussions as well to see how NIDIS could be most helpful to all of you in terms of addressing gaps in drought information, research, communication across the Southeast. And that's it. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks, Meredith. Some exciting things coming up in the future for the ACF and the general region. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers today: David Zierden of the Florida Climate Center, Paul Ankhorn of USGS, Jeffrey Dober of the Southeast River Forecast Center, and Troy Ephraim of the Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District. I don't believe I said this in the beginning, but my name is Rachel McGuire, and I'm with the Auburn University Water Resources Center. There are a bunch of links on this slide for you that has more information about all of our speaker topics. I also have contact information listed on the bottom left if you need to get in touch with me about anything regarding the webinar. And our next webinar will be Tuesday, February 25th, again at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. And we will begin posting video recordings of these webinars via a YouTube link that you will receive in a follow-up email that also has the summary of today's briefing. And I wanted to extend the opportunity for anyone to ask any questions, or if there were any discussion items that wanted to be addressed today. You can use the question box or raise your hand on the GoToMeeting tool panel.
Rachel, this is Meredith. While we see if there's any more further questions or comments, you may have noticed that we're using a new approach to send out reminders for these monthly webinars, and it includes an opportunity to highlight upcoming events or recent research or new documents relevant to drought or climate writ large in the ACF River Basin. So if you ever have something that you would like us to amplify, to share with the broader community, please feel free to send it to Rachel or myself, and we'd be happy to include that in our monthly email reminders. Thank you.
All right, well, it looks like we don't have any questions. We'll stay on the line just a little bit longer.
Hey, Rachel,
sorry.
I have a question. This is Jeff Dover from Southeast RC. I have a question. What the two meetings, the one on April 29th in Albany, and then the March 4th East Point, Florida meeting, what will those, again, what will they be discussing? So is that going to be, what's going to be the topic of those two? Is that more for stakeholders, or is?
I can answer that. Hi, Jeffrey, this is Meredith. It's for both, it's really for a broad group of both information providers and users. So this is a listening session to inform the development of a new online tool called the Drought Dashboard, and I'll be happy to send you. We have a 2-page summary. I would love to see people who provide the information as well there, because we want to make sure that we're capturing everything that that you have as best as we can in this. It's going to be a GIS-based interface that will be very interactive.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day. We will see you next month on February 25th.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.